So, cynics have been predicting the death of cinema for a while now, and it never really seems to materialize, and I think that there's a reason for that. I think the obvious reason is that people really do like going to the movies. There's something special about it. And every time there's a new technology that seems like it's going to displace the cinema, we are proven wrong. The Depression didn't kill the cinema, television didn't kill the cinema, VHS didn't kill the cinema, and I don't think streaming is killing the cinema now. There's this idea that people will only go to the movies right now if it's a big event release, like the next Marvel movie, that you just have to go see in the theater. And I think that there's some truth to that, but I think that the studios are getting the wrong message. I think if you look at the data, it's not that people only want to come out to the theater to see the next Marvel movie or the next event release. It's that there's this perception that a lot of movies are just not worth going to the theater to see. But we know that that's not true, actually. We have a lot of data to suggest that it's actually the opposite. That if studios make good movies, people will come out to see them, no matter what the genre is, no matter what type of movie it is. People will go and watch it on the big screen. What I want to do in this video is talk about all the amazing things that theaters are doing, because there's some insane technology that is now available in theaters. So movies sound and look better than they ever have, but still there's this perception that the movie theater is dying. And the good news is I think that they're already on it. So for example, consider Jane Hastings. She recently became the CEO of the Global Cinema Federation, which is like the international movie theater trade organization. And she pretty much hits the nail on the head. They know exactly what they need to fix. And so in an interview with Box Office Magazine, she goes into it. She talked about how some limited releases are, quote, leaving money on the table by not capitalizing on global markets. Off-peak releases can take better advantage of premium screens when they're not being used by bigger releases like the latest Marvel movie. More importantly, though, she says, right now, we have key demographics starved for content. We need more films for mature audiences and female audiences. She mentions 4 specific priorities that the Global Cinema Federation will have moving forward. These include encouraging studios and filmmakers to make more big screen titles, a greater variety of films, including action thrillers, horror, drama, comedy, and she especially mentions romance as a way of getting more women into the theater, improving the exhibition industry's narrative of moviegoers, and showcasing all of cinema's recent innovations, such as 4D and premium experiences. So again, the one that jumps out to me is the narrative of moviegoers. She's very well aware of the fact that audiences have this perception that the movie has to be big and loud, otherwise there's no real point in going to see the movie. But we know that cinemas have so much more to offer than that. Comedies and musicals and romantic films, for example, which she does mention, are highlighted because they're communal experiences. And I would even add, as a horror movie lover, something that's near and dear to my heart, horror movies are fantastic when you see them in a theater, with other people who are watching it with you and they're reacting to all the same moments that you're reacting to. There's just nothing like it, especially if you're watching it at a film festival with a bunch of people who were attracted specifically to watch these weird little movies with you on the big screen together. There's just nothing like it. But comedies are a really good example because every time, again, they say it has to be an event release, otherwise people won't come out and watch it, but then Anyone But You becomes a sleeper hit with a budget of $25 million, but it does over $200 million because people just want to go watch good movies. And they're fine paying the high ticket price if it's a good movie. So the big shiny thing is not just coming from Hollywood anymore. There are indie movies that are doing really well in the theater, and they would do much better if people actually knew about them. So the big shiny thing is not just coming from Hollywood anymore. Every type of movie, whether it's a drama, an indie film, a comedy, or a big Marvel movie, you can go to the movie theater down the street right now and watch just about anything. But that's not even the thing I want to talk about in this video. What I want to talk about in this video are all of the amazing things that movie theaters are doing in terms of technology to make all movies look and sound amazing. So what I want to focus on in this video is actually that 4th priority by Jane Hastings, which is all about the innovations and the upgrades that movie theaters are making to the presentation of the movies themselves. Because it doesn't matter what kind of movie it is, they're going to look and sound better than they ever have before. Cinema has always been a medium seeking to reinvent itself. And although the basic structure of the cinematic experience has not changed that much in 100 years, all of its individual elements have gotten serious upgrades. In the last 20 years in particular, nearly everything has been digitized, and while some filmmakers have decried this change, it's safe to say the industry is poised to reinvent itself yet again. For the last 25 years, a process has been underway to make sure digital cinema looks just as good as film, or better. And I'll definitely say the transition has been interesting. For years, the standard of film projection was 35mm film stock at 24 frames per second. This standard was originally set around a century ago by the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, a standards and practices organization. In 1999, this organization created a committee to look into digital cinema, and the committee was called DC-28. The concern was over whether digital could actually produce a better sound and image than film, which is analog. Filmmakers and cinematographers in particular were concerned about their work being degraded by poor presentation that was chosen more for economic reasons rather than quality. If it's one thing we know about studios, it's their tendency to prioritize economics over anything else. Those concerns were taken seriously, though, and the committee decided that the image quality of 35mm film would be the standard by which they judged digital cinema moving forward. Not long after this, the National Association of Theater Owners, or quite confusingly called NATO, produced a sort of addendum to this standard, agreeing with the result, but also emphasizing things like access for those with disabilities, as well as standardizing the software that theater owners would use, something that became the theater management system, which all theaters showing films digitally now use. The Big Six also had their own council called Digital Cinema Initiatives. It said that its objective was the same. It wanted to define a digital cinema system that would, according to a 2005 report, quote, present a theatrical experience that is better than what one could achieve now with a traditional 35mm answer print. Suffice it to say, every aspect of the cinema has gotten serious upgrades in the last 20 or 30 years. I want to go through these individual elements of cinema, show how far they've come, and then at the end, I'm going to show you stuff the cinema industry is working on that will probably blow your mind. And there's honestly so much to talk about here, but in this video, I'm just going to look at 3 aspects of cinema that have undergone the biggest changes, the most important ones, starting with the light sources used throughout cinema's history has had an impact on film, in particular because of 2 things, the color and the brightness. The first light sources were experimental. The biggest one involved an actual flame that heated a calcium oxide tube, causing it to glow, creating limelight, which was already being used in theaters at the time. It produced a very bright but soft white glow. This was soon replaced everywhere because it turns out fire is bad, especially when you consider that the nitrate film they were using at the time was also flammable. Limelight was replaced with incandescent lighting, which became the standard all the way through the 50s. The original carbon arc light bulbs produce a warm yellowish light that was only good for about an hour or so at a time. This worked just fine when real changes were necessary, but when the platter system became the standard, where films could be built in their entirety and rest on large rotating discs, then real changes were unnecessary. This prompted the change from carbon arc light bulbs to xenon, which lasts much longer. Xenon produces super bright white light, which is why they're used in searchlights. The light from xenon bulbs is spectrally similar to actual sunlight and can produce much richer colors, which is why they became the standard in movie projectors. That is, until a man named Bill Beck pushed for movie theaters to adopt literal lasers. Laser projectors are known as the fourth generation of projector light, after the three I just mentioned. It wasn't until very recently that the government approved the use of lasers for commercial uses like movie projectors. Through his organization, the Laser Illuminated Projector Association, Bill Beck and others received several Academy Awards for technical achievement for advancing this technology. In fact, 7 of the 16 people presented with Scientific and Technical Achievement Awards at this year's Oscars received them for this work specifically. So why does this matter? Because lasers are the most efficient way to produce light that is presently scalable for movie theaters. And the difference is very much worth noticing. Lasers are 6 times brighter than traditional bulbs, and they allow for an extremely fast and stable frame rate for digital use. They produce very high contrast images with bright highlights and rich darks. It also enables a wider angle without relative loss of light, which benefits theaters utilizing large formats like IMAX. More on that in a minute though. Lasers will soon replace xenon as the standard light source in all movie projectors. Barco is a manufacturer at the forefront of these projectors, and many indie theaters are already using them, but bigger chains have caught on as well. In 2022, AMC announced that it will be replacing 3,500 of its screens with laser projectors. Christie is a very old manufacturer of projectors that has an RGB laser projector, which is being used in France and elsewhere. As for LED, we're still a few years out from that. Samsung is interested in pioneering the LED cinema screen, but the technology is presently very cost prohibitive. The cost includes the materials and the installation, but also the massive amount of power usage. However, LED screens would take lighting efficiency to a whole new place. If the economics change, LED screens could be the next impossible final evolution of lighting. And that brings us to the second technological change. One of digital cinema's most marketable upgrades is the sound. This is one area that didn't really change that much once sound came to film. Silent cinema was never really silent. What we think of as sound is actually synchronous sound, where the film's sound is not live but part of the film itself. For most of cinema's history, there was one analog soundtrack included on the film itself. Then, in the 90s, the film industry attempted to compete with VHS and DVD by expanding theaters into megaplexes, and of course by promoting digital sound as the new big shiny thing. The 3 biggest ones all became standard soundtracks included on every print. Each print contained an analog stereo soundtrack in between the film image and the perforation, an SDDS track on the outside edge, Dolby Digital imprints in between the perforations, which actually appears 26 frames ahead of the image projected, and a DTS timecode in between the analog soundtrack and the image. This became the standard until film was phased out by digital cinema in the mid-2010s. The first film to be released with digital audio appears to be Batman Returns, released in Dolby Digital in 1992. In particular, it used Dolby SRD. Dolby Digital is actually an umbrella term used to describe any of a number of audio compression formats produced by Dolby Laboratories. It's a lossy audio compression format, which means much of the data is approximated during playback, which is done to reduce the size of the data file. Dolby Digital only originally had 5 channels until it came out with the 7-channel Dolby Surround, starting with Toy Story 3 in 2010. Dolby Atmos came 2 years later, which utilizes up to 128 individual channels and up to 64 feeds for speakers that are mostly placed above the auditorium to create something known as height sound. Dolby actually experimented with this as early as 2002 with We Were Soldiers by creating a soundtrack known as Sonic Whole Overhead Sound. Dolby Atmos has since been adapted for home theater entertainment systems, and it's included on most 4K Ultra HD releases, and it's available to stream by most streaming services now. The second major digital sound format is DTS, or Digital Theater Systems, which first appeared in 1993 with the film Jurassic Park. Unlike the other digital formats which appear on the film, its data is stored on a CD-ROM with a timecode marker on the film strip to sync the sound. As hokey as that sounds, it has the advantage of allowing for a larger data file with different compression techniques. DTS is also the only digital sound format used for 70mm film, which does not have an analog soundtrack at all. It just uses the DTS timecode on the side of the film. DTS has since put out several high-definition surround sound formats, as well as DTS-X and its many variants, which creates height channels just like Dolby Atmos. The two formats are the biggest sound formats in both cinema and home media. Then there's SDDS, by far the saddest of the three. This format, which stands for Sony Dynamic Digital Sound, was Sony's attempt at producing digital audio, and it developed a very poor reputation among projectionists like yours truly, once upon a time. So I can attest from personal experience, having been a projectionist, that we would get brand new prints straight from the factory. And a week or two into their run, if they were primarily recorded on SDDS sound, they would start to have sound problems. SDDS is also just not a very good sound format in general for technical reasons that I'm not even going to go into in this video. It's just not a very good format. The format was the first format to have 7-channel surround sound, even though most studios were not recording or mixing their audio in that many channels. It just sort of appeared one day in movies like Geronimo and Last Action Hero. Initially, it was a product of Columbia Pictures exclusively, but soon every print included it. The biggest problem with it is that it's not reliable. It's on the outside of the film strip, which means it was very vulnerable to wear and tear, leading to something called dropout, where the digital audio cuts out completely and reverts to the analog stereo soundtrack. But while we're talking about sound, something else that deserves to be mentioned here, which went a long way towards making sure movies sounded good, is THX. So THX is not actually a sound format or a recording technology. It's essentially a quality control system. The idea behind it is to make sure that whatever the filmmaker's specifications were when they made the movie, for the ideal viewing situation for that movie, THX would get as close as possible to whatever that is. Theaters would be given physical upgrades like acoustically treated walls, a perforated screen if it didn't already have one for better center channel sound, and a special checklist regarding background noises like air conditioning and the projector. A rating known as NC30 was given to theaters that passed this requirement. THX actually dates back to 1983's The Return of the Jedi, when an employee from Lucasfilm named Tomlinson Holman worked together with George Lucas to make improvements to a theater and decided that it was important enough to standardize their system. THX certifies other mediums as well. In 1997, Twister's DVD release became the first THX certified digital mastering. In 2002, Lincoln became the first automaker to offer a THX certified premium car stereo system, and a year later, Electronic Arts became the first video game designer to begin promoting its games as THX certified. And that brings us to the third technological change, which is by far the biggest, and that's the screen size. One aspect of cinema that has been experimental ever since the beginning is the screen size. It's probably the one area of film that currently mimics the experimental nature of its earliest days. As early as 1900, they already had developed something called panorama. This was created by Raoul Grimond-Sanson, who accomplished a system of displaying a panoramic image that goes all the way around a stadium using 10 different projectors. This was more of a theme park attraction than a practical approach to cinema, and many such attempts are still treated this way. A 3-camera system known as Polyvision produced the epic silent film Napoleon in 1927, but again, this never really caught on. It wasn't until the 1950s when experimentation in larger formats was taken seriously, not just by theater owners, but by the filmmakers and studios. Anamorphic lenses were adopted as a means of presenting a much wider view on a single frame. This is how widescreen was born. This changed everything. Suddenly, directors could look at all the space to the left and right of the action and either fill it or not. Scenes that might feel claustrophobic and basic now feel bigger and more complex. Rather than having filmmakers shoot with more than one camera, widescreen was accomplished by compressing the image into a normal 35mm print and then expanded with an anamorphic lens during projection. The two biggest manufacturers of these anamorphic lenses were CinemaScope and Panavision's Panatar. CinemaScope developed a reputation for being really bad for close-ups, so filmmakers shied away from them if they were shooting in scope. Later, 70mm film stock became the standard for large format filmmaking. This is a format that doesn't require the image to be compressed at all. Ben-Hur was the first Panavision film in 70mm. VistaVision was another format by Paramount that also produced widescreen, but did it by turning the image sideways instead of compressing it with an anamorphic lens. The main advantage to this was producing a fine-grained image, but this became obsolete because fine-grained film stock became available. All these formats also took advantage of state-of-the-art new coloring technologies like Technicolor, which improved picture quality to a degree that seeing films on a giant screen suddenly made a lot more sense. And so finally, the last upgrade in terms of screen size that had a huge impact on cinema as we know it today is IMAX. IMAX uses a similar concept to VistaVision, but on 70mm. It turns the image sideways to get the maximum resolution possible. And for this reason, unlike traditional projectors, it's fed into the IMAX projectors sideways. IMAX has actually been around since the 70s, and other than the occasional concert film, it mostly didn't release theatrical films until 2000. That's when Disney released Fantasia 2000 on New Year's Day. By then, most films were not suitable for IMAX's 5-story curved screen, which pretty much required this 70mm film format. Warner Brothers was actually the first to really capitalize on this. A process was developed for converting films that were originally shot on 35mm film and converted them to 70mm, and the process was known as digital media remastering, or DMR. And Star Wars Episode II: Attack of the Clones, along with Apollo 13, became the first films adapted using this process. At the time, 70mm could only handle a certain length, though, so these films were edited for time. The Matrix Reloaded was the first new film to use this process. Later, filmmakers began shooting in the official 70mm IMAX format. Chris Nolan was perhaps the first, having supposedly filmed 28 minutes of his film The Dark Knight in IMAX. Many other films after this shot part of its film in IMAX as well, including Star Trek Into Darkness, Hunger Games: Catching Fire, as well as Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and its sequel, The Last Jedi. The first films to be filmed entirely in IMAX were the Avengers films Infinity War and Endgame. Then, in 2020, IMAX responded to the rise of digital cinema by creating a program called Filmed in IMAX. This would acknowledge films that were filmed with a digital camera capable of producing a resolution high enough to be comparable to that of 70mm IMAX. Believe it or not, ARRI, Panavision, Red Digital Cinema, and Sony all make cameras that are capable of doing this. Some of the first films to use these cameras include Suicide Squad, Dune, and Top Gun: Maverick, and many others soon followed. Picture quality has now reached a point where there's functionally no difference between what is practically achievable, even for indie filmmakers, on the one hand, and the maximum large format cinematic experience possible on the other. Oppenheimer became the first film shot on IMAX to receive an Academy Award for cinematography. According to IMAX's CEO, it was also the second highest grossing ticket seller on IMAX screens last year, behind Taylor Swift, of course. In fact, 2023 was the second best year that IMAX has ever had, bringing in over $1 billion. The best was 2019, which was the year that saw 9 different films that each did over $1 billion in sales. And IMAX is not the only game in town anymore. Its competition now includes Dolby Cinema, CinemarkXD, and soon to be many others. We've now reached a point when people can watch films with the highest resolution, the best color and lighting, and the absolute best sound. It's a true golden age of cinema, where films look and sound as good as they ever have. In fact, there's two experiences that are sort of like the apotheosis of everything that I've talked about so far, and that's THX Ultimate Cinema and Dolby Cinema, which are pretty much the best of the best that you can get right now in terms of everything that I've just talked about. But I'm going to talk about those in the next video, because as crazy as this all is, we're just getting started. Honestly, some of that stuff is just going to blow your mind, so you're definitely going to want to check out that video here, I think. I'm pretty sure it's here. Is it here?